Production agriculture like maple requires more than the tools of the trade, like taps and tubing. It also has to account for animals. Today we're going to examine research into the interactions between wildlife and infrastructure to learn, to borrow a phrase from Robert Frost, whose woods these are. Good afternoon and thanks for stopping by Across the Fence. I'm Keith Silva in for Amy Finley. While much of the focus in the maple industry is on the finished product, there's a lot more to it than that. Syrup gets all the glory, but sugar makers spend as much time checking for leaks and managing the forest as they do boiling. Much of that management involves wildlife. Our focus today is about who's stopping by the sugar woods on a snowy evening to continue our frosty train of thought. Tim Rademacher is the Director of Scientific Research at the Proctor Maple Research Center in Underhill, and Naya Banerjee is a graduate student in the Field Naturalist program at UVM. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Tim. Good to have you both here. Tim, maple's all about product and efficiency and getting all that sap boiled. What do we care about wildlife for?
Oh, maple is so much more, Keith. Maple, you know, one of the magic of maple is that it's the integrated chain from, you know, the natural resource in the very beginning to not even just the final product, but also the marketing of it and everything, right? And a lot of people forget about that, especially at this time of year. We get so excited about, you know, the transformation process. We get excited about getting into the sugar house, getting into open house weekend, you know, smelling that wonderful aroma when you come into the sugar house where it's transformed, that we tend to forget that maple is happening all year round in the woods. And there's an entire ecosystem that's attached to it. And these ecosystems are really important for multiple purposes. And as sugar makers, we are stewards of these ecosystems. And that's part of what we do.
Naya, we've highlighted the UVM Field Naturalist program before, how they use camera traps to catch wildlife. You brought along some video. Who did you find in the woods?
So we found fishers, we found moose, we saw a bear, we saw a deer, we saw foxes, coyotes also.
One of the shots that you sent that I did not include is mice. I was a little weirded out by seeing mice in the. But if there's wildlife, we're going to talk about birds in a little bit. Barred owls were a couple of things that you caught, and if there's mice, if there's barred owls, there's mice. So, where did you figure to set the traps up? How did you know where to catch the wildlife?
Yeah, so I spent some time tracking across the parcel to see where I could see, you know, sign of wildlife moving around on the landscape. I looked for water features where animals might go to get water. And I looked for sort of pinch points in the landscape, like in the topography, where deer might choose to take paths or just kind of ridges that they might travel, things like that. So yeah, did some tracking to find that.
Tim, because most of sugar making done on a large scale basis is done with tubing, it doesn't take long. That tubing breaks down one way or another, and if there's leaks, it doesn't take long for a squirrel or an animal to figure out there's a sweet treat in there. Some good carbohydrates just passing right by. We've got some images of animal chews. How often does this happen, where an animal chews through the line?
Yeah, it's something that it's certainly an interaction we know of. And, you know, it's not just chewing. Sometimes it's also like some creatures are very curious, like bears, you know, and sometimes they straight away rip things out. And not because, you know, there's no mean intent behind it. It's just their curiosity. They want to try to figure out what's happening there. They are, you know, they smell things. They see these weird structures. The question is, for us, that's one of the main motivators for Naya's work as well. How often does this happen, and in what circumstances, and what can we do to minimize the negative effects on wildlife and to minimize the confrontation between wildlife and sugar makers, right? And that's something that at the moment, like, we know these animals occupy that ecosystem, they live there. But in some sugar bushes, that kind of cohabitation works super well, and there's almost no issues. And in others, there are recurrent issues, you know, with squirrels chewing on the tubing and similar things. And the question is, why are there these differences? My suspicion is, but I'm purely speculating here, is that in some ecosystems, you know, there's a good balance. You have predators that hunt on the small animals, and you know, everything is in balance, so you never get real big issues. Well, in others, you might have an explosion of the squirrel population because you maybe lack the necessary predators to keep that population in check. And that kind of stuff, you know, we're purely speculating at the moment. So with Naya's work, one of the things we want to do is try to build a foundation to even understand what is in the sugar bush, how does it interact with the tubing, and how does that change the behavior for the wildlife, so that we can hopefully give guidance at some point to how to avoid conflict with wildlife.
I think what's interesting about this research is that, you know, it's not just you know, the chews and the things that are sort of all sugar makers are always dealing with, but a moose can do a lot more destruction, you know, just walking through the woods than we saw the moose in the video that Naya had of going under the main line there. So I thought, you know, try a little harder next time, moose. You can do it. You can break that main line.
But you see, that's a really interesting case in point. I mean, we've caught multiple moose on camera, and the cameras were set up in a way to actually see their interaction with the tubing itself. And we didn't see any destructive interactions. I mean, we've seen some interactions where actually they went really out of their way not to destroy something, but to duck underneath, right? So I think we tend to be biased to think about the destruction, because that's quite often, that's something that we can find afterwards.
Sure.
Well, we don't see all of the other interactions. We don't see the fact either that moose themselves are also affected by this, because, you know, when you're walking through a wintry landscape with loads of snow, having that additional barrier of tubing might actually affect your fitness in the long run.
Interesting. Naya, how did you get interested in this research?
Well, in the Field Naturalist program, we're trained in kind of ecology, conservation, field science, those sorts of things. But we're also a service learning program, which means we spend a significant portion, like almost a year, working with a conservation organization or another organization which wants to do a project on the landscape. So I got interested in Tim's project, studying the interaction of wildlife and habitat in the sugar bush, because one, I was trying to learn how to track animals in the landscape, and I wanted to get more practice doing that. And I was also interested in general in how human land use interacts with wildlife habitat. And so this was a particular niche to try to study that in.
I think a lot of times we think of human interaction. I think that was the phrase you used. You know, we think of building and you know, houses and things like that, but agriculture plays a huge role in that, and agriculture, maple certainly plays a role in that. Did you know a lot about maple sugaring or anything like that before you took on this project?
I think I was not totally aware of the scale of tubing networks that, you know, can be used on the landscape, and of sort of the equipment that's used in modern sugaring to make the extraction of sap and syrup from it really efficient. I think I thought of it more as kind of like a cottage industry where we're tapping the trees into buckets and hauling it away and boiling it on a wood stove and things
nostalgic.
Like that. Yeah.
Nostalgic.
Yeah.
But that's, if you allow,
Yeah.
that's a really interesting point, and you know, that's also part of what motivates this research. Because with Act 59, Vermont has committed to conserve a certain amount of its territory. At the same time, some agricultural crops are taking up more and more space, like maple sugaring. It's an expanding industry, right? So there is a conflict in the making, potentially. And you know, we want to get a step ahead before it becomes a conflict, because there are two different land users that are trying to get more and more of the share of the land base. We want to try to figure out, is there a way to reconcile these two? Are there practices that we can put forward to make sure that the two work hand in hand rather than against each other? And you know, trying to get ahead of the game here.
Well, you referenced it earlier, Tim. what does and I wanted to ask both of you, what does this mean? What can you extrapolate from what you've seen? Okay, you got some cool pictures of bears and fishers and moose going through the sugar bush. So what?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. So each of these animals, can tell us slightly different things, and I would, have the caveat that extrapolating from just a video or a series of videos,
Sure.
you want to be careful about. But for example, if we're seeing fisher across a lot of the landscape, then that's telling us that maybe the forest is mature and it has what's called structural complexity. So that means like there's an overstory, there's understory, there's shrub layer, there's like complex, forest features, there's woody material that's left on the ground that fisher are interested in nesting in, or cavities, things like that. So it's like an interesting forest.
Right.
And then, the bears are curious. The moose, you can see, are kind of encountering the tubing. Like they're one of the animals that's, the tubing is at a height where they're having to go through it. And so it raises questions of how are they adapting to it? Are they, just learning how to go under it? Are they avoiding those paths? What are they doing? And we want more information about that.
Tim, what can you add?
Yeah, we just saw a video of a barred owl as well, right?
Right.
So this tubing might even change the behavior. Like those owls were sitting on the main lines, right? And we've some video where they clearly sit there to scout, to hunt. So it might actually affect even the behavior of the animals. There are some things you can very clearly say, even from a single video, I would argue. Some people told me there are no moose in a sugar bush. They learn after a couple of years that there's tubing and they learn to go around it. We repeatedly see moose in our sugar bush, so we can prove that they are there. They occupy the same territory, and we didn't have any issues with destroyed parts of the tubing, so that interaction can be mutually beneficial. But there are also some things, like Naya explained, that this is a baseline. We are building a baseline here. We are trying to understand where do we start from, and then hopefully we will get further research funded to actually look into how can we adapt practices to reduce the impact on wildlife once we know what the baseline is to start with.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very much. This has been a great discussion. We didn't even get into bird-friendly maple, but that would have to be for another time. My thanks to the team behind the scenes here at WCX, who always make sure to get my best side for the camera. I'm Keith Silva. This is Across the Fence. Thanks for being part of our family.